Ilara Vance nearly bled to death on a cold surgical table at 19 years old, giving birth 7 months into a pregnancy she was facing completely alone. No father held her hand. No parent waited in the corridor. When she woke up, her 2LB daughter was fighting for life in the incubators of the charity ward, and her parents had already told their social circle she was dead. She had 10 pounds to her name and a body torn apart by childbirth. How does a teenage girl survive that? This is her story. Welcome back to Timeless Tales, my beautiful, amazing history family. You all have been so supportive, and I promise to always try my best to give you the best stories as I learn and improve every day. If this is your first time coming across my video, do comment below where you're watching from and hit subscribe to officially join the Timeless family. Today's story comes with a roller coaster of emotions, so brace yourself as we get right into it. The automaton clock arrived at the workshop on a Thursday, wrapped in layers of velvet and straw, its gears frozen in silence for perhaps a century. Ilara Vance set it on her workbench beneath the harsh gaslight and felt the familiar flutter in her chest, half excitement, half reverence. This was why she'd chosen restoration work. Why? She spent 60 hours a week in the basement studio of Blackwood & Sons Antiques, while her former classmates from finishing school posted letters about garden parties and trips to the Riviera. Objects held memory. Her hands could coax those memories back to life. She was 19 years old, brilliant with damaged things and barely surviving. The room she rented in the East End cost nearly all her wages for a drafty corner and a radiator that hissed like an angry cat. Her pay packet from the shop, where she was paid under the table to avoid guild fees, covered rent, bus fare, tinned soup, and not much else. Her parents had made their position clear when she'd chosen horology over a sensible marriage. If she wanted to waste her potential on manual labor, she could fund that mistake herself. Arthur and Beatrice Vance didn't raise their only daughter to work with her hands like a common laborer. So Ilara worked with her hands in private, in a basement that smelled of brass polish and damp brick, and told herself she was happy. The clock was Swiss, circa 1780, with a pastoral scene painted on its casing. A shepherdess watching over lambs beneath a willow tree. Someone had tried to repair the mechanism decades ago with iron screws that had rusted into the brass. Ilara sketched the damage from 6 angles, made notes in her cramped handwriting, then carefully began disassembly. She didn't hear him enter. The shop was closed for a private viewing upstairs, some banker's wife buying a Turner landscape, and Ilara had assumed she was alone in the building. When she looked up, he was standing 3 feet away, watching her work with an expression she couldn't quite read. The service entrance was open, he said, which was a lie. The studio door was always locked during private events. Ilara should have been frightened. She was alone in a basement with a strange man who'd somehow bypassed security. Instead, she registered his charcoal wool suit that fit like it had been tailored on Savile Row. The gold watch on his wrist, the way he held himself with the particular stillness of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "The viewing is upstairs," she said, not quite steady. "This area is off-limits to guests." "I know." He moved closer, his gaze dropping to the clock. 1780s Jacques Draws mechanism. Someone butchered it. "You know automatons?" she asked. "I'd like to think I do." His eyes met hers. They were an unsettling shade of hazel, like autumn leaves under frost. "I'm Julian. That's the turn of the century, isn't it?" She wiped her dusty hands on her work apron, suddenly conscious of her pinned-up hair and bare face and the oil stain on her skirt. "Ilara, and you still shouldn't be down here." "Then I'll leave." But he didn't move. "What will you do with it?" he asked, pointing at the clock. Replace the iron screws with period-appropriate brass fittings. Realign the mainspring. Clean and oil the escapement. Restore the painted scene where the lacquer has degraded. She heard herself talking too fast, showing off like a child seeking approval. It'll tick again. That's the goal. Make it tick. How long will that take? 6 weeks, maybe 8. Julian smiled, a slow unfurling that changed his entire face. Then I have 6 weeks to convince you to have dinner with me. He came back the next evening, just as Ilara was locking up, and the evening after that, and the one after that. He never explained how he kept getting past security. He never mentioned the private viewing again, or whether he'd purchased anything. He claimed to be a freelance architect, vague enough to mean anything or nothing, and said he traveled frequently for reconstruction projects. He asked about her process, her training, what had drawn her to restoration. When she talked, he listened with complete attention, as though she were the only person in London who mattered. Ilara had been invisible her entire life, too plain for her mother's social ambitions, too artistic for her father's rigid pragmatism, too broke to keep up with her debutante acquaintances. Julian looked at her like she was a masterpiece. On their 4th meeting, he brought her supper. On the 7th, he asked if he could watch her work. She said yes, hyper-aware of his presence as she carefully extracted a corroded pin from the clock's gear train. His proximity made her hands shake. "You're 25?" she guessed. 26, 27, he admitted. 8 years older. Not scandalous, but enough to make her feel young and uncertain. "And you really want to spend your evenings watching me clean rust off antique gears?" "I'm between lives right now," Julian said quietly. "The old one doesn't fit anymore, and the new one hasn't started yet. This," he gestured at the studio, at her, at the careful work spread across her bench. "This feels real. You feel real." She kissed him that night, standing on her toes to reach him, tasting tea and something darker, more complicated. He kissed her back with a hunger that should have frightened her. Instead, it made her feel powerful. They kept it secret at his insistence. No restaurants where they might be seen, no photographs. He never gave her his telephone number. He would call her from phone booths, untraceable. He said he wanted to keep what they had pure, untouched by outside judgment and other people's opinions. He said the world would try to ruin them if they weren't careful. Ilara, 19, and in love for the first time, thought it was romantic. But Dottie didn't. No paper trail at all. Her best friend sat on Ilara's floor. There was a mattress, but no actual bed frame, eating fish and chips and glaring at Ilara. Not even a business card. That's not mysterious, darling. That's suspicious. He values privacy. He pays for everything in cash. You've never been to his flat. He won't tell you where his office is. Those aren't privacy concerns. Those are warning bells. Dottie pointed at Chip accusingly. He's either married or running from the law. He's not married. How do you know? Because he comes to my cramped room 3 nights a week and stays until dawn. His expensive suit's discarded on my threadbare rug. Because he touches me like I'm something precious and breakable. Because when I asked him directly, he looked genuinely hurt by the question. "I just know," Ilara said. Dottie sighed. "You're 19, Ellie, and he's almost 30. I'm just saying men that age who go for teenagers usually do it because women their own age see through their nonsense." "I'm not a teenager. I'm an adult. You're a teenager with adult responsibilities. There's a difference." Dottie's voice softened. "I'm not trying to ruin this for you. I just don't want you to get hurt." But Ilara was already falling, and people who are falling never think they're going to hit the ground. The clock was nearly complete when she found the handkerchief. Julian had stayed over on a Tuesday. Unusual for him. He typically kept to weekends and left early for a site visit he wouldn't specify. His suit jacket hung on the back of her door. Ilara had lifted it to hang properly when something white slipped from the inner pocket. silk, expensive, monogrammed in navy thread. TSS. She stood holding it for a long moment, her heart doing something complicated in her chest. Thorn Shipping and Steel. She knew that name. Everyone knew that name. They built the ships that won the war, and the steel beams rebuilding London. Government contracts worth millions. The chairman had been knighted last year. Julian worked for them. That explained the secrecy. Maybe he'd signed a confidentiality agreement. Maybe his work was classified or sensitive. Maybe he really was just a consultant trying to keep his professional and personal lives separate. When he came by that evening, she showed him the handkerchief. "This fell out of your jacket," she said, watching his face. "Thorn Shipping? You work for them?" Something shifted in his expression. A door closing, a mask sliding into place. For just a second, she saw fear. "No," he said slowly. "That belonged to my father. He died 2 years ago. I carry it sometimes." He took it from her hands, his fingers trembling slightly. "He worked for them his whole life, gave them everything. I keep it to remind myself not to make the same mistakes." The grief in his voice sounded real. The tremor in his hands looked genuine. Elara thought about her own parents, how her father still wore his regimental tie to funerals of men he'd barely known, how her mom kept her presentation gown in a cedar chest, like a shrine to who she used to be. People carried their parents' ghosts in strange ways. "I'm sorry," she said. "I shouldn't have looked through your things." "It's fine," Julian noted, then pulled her in. The black Rolls-Royce appeared a week later, parked across from the antique shop with its engine running and curtains drawn so tight they looked like eyelids shut against the world. Elara noticed it on a Wednesday, then again on Friday, then every day the following week, always the same spot, always idling. She mentioned it to the shop owner. He said he'd look into it. She mentioned it to Julian. He glanced out the studio window, and his entire body went rigid, jaw clenched, shoulders locked, hands curling into fists. "Julian, it's nothing." But his voice was tight. Probably just someone's driver. "For 8 days straight?" He turned away from the window. "I should go. Early meeting tomorrow." "It's Thursday. You always stay on Thursdays." "Not tonight." He kissed her. Too brief, too distracted. "I'll call you." He didn't call for 4 days. When he finally came back, he made love to her with a desperate intensity that left marks on her hips and tears in her eyes. Afterward, he held her like she was the only solid thing in a collapsing world. "I love you," he said into her hair. "Whatever happens, remember I love you." Elara, 19 years old, with her whole future unspooling before her in the dark, whispered it back and thought she understood what love meant. The clock was finished. She wound the mechanism with the original brass key, and it played a bright, crystalline melody while the painted shepherdess raised her staff. Perfect, restored motion. Julian didn't come that night, or the next, or the one after that. A few weeks later, Elara visited a doctor in Soho and watched him write a sentence in her file that changed everything. That day, she'd left Julian 7 messages at the operator service he used. Days later, she understood that the only thing worse than being invisible was being seen completely, loved thoroughly, and abandoned. Anyway, the black Rolls-Royce was gone. So was Julian, and Elara Vance, 19 years old and pregnant and utterly alone, sat in her empty room and finally understood what Dottie had been trying to tell her. Men who hide do so for a reason. And she just learned what that reason was. The doctor's note sat on the edge of her wash basin for days before Elara could bring herself to hide it away. Gravida, clear as a verdict. She'd spent money she didn't have on a second opinion that spelled it out in words, so there could be no misinterpretation. Pregnant, pregnant, pregnant. She was 19 years old, barely keeping her head above water financially, and the father had disappeared without explanation. Except, he hadn't disappeared completely. That evening, Julian called from yet another unfamiliar number. His voice sounded strained, distant, like he was calling from the bottom of the ocean. "I'm sorry," he said before she could speak. "Family emergency. I'm back now. Can I see you?" Ilara had been furious, had rehearsed speeches about respect and communication, and how you don't just vanish on someone you claim to love. But when he arrived at her room that evening looking exhausted and somehow smaller than she remembered, the anger collapsed into relief. He was here. He'd come back. She made tea. Neither of them drank. They sat on her mattress, their knees touching, and Ilara tried to find the words she'd been practicing for days. In her imagination, this moment had gone a dozen different ways. Some where he was thrilled, others where he was scared but supportive, a few where he was honest about not being ready. In none of them had she anticipated the complete stillness that came over him when she finally said it. "I'm pregnant." Julian didn't move, didn't blink. For a moment she thought he hadn't heard her, but then she saw his hands clench against his thighs, knuckles going white. "Are you sure?" His voice came out choked. "I've seen 2 doctors. I'm sure." He stood abruptly, walked to her single window that looked out onto an alleyway and someone else's brick wall. She watched his shoulders rise and fall with careful breaths, watched him trying to compose himself. When he turned back, his face had rearranged into something that might have been calm if his eyes weren't so wild. 48 hours, he said. "Give me 48 hours to handle something, and then we'll face this together. I promise, Ilara, we'll figure it out." "Handle what? I just need to—" "There are arrangements I have to make. People I need to talk to." He crossed back to her, cupped her face in both hands. "Trust me, 2 days and then everything will be different. Better. I'll make this right." He kissed her forehead, gentle and lingering, like a blessing or an apology. Then he left. 3 days later, Ilara had called the operator 17 times. She'd sent telegrams that progressed from concerned to confused to angry to begging. She'd written to the single address he'd ever mentioned, a post box in the city, and gotten no response. It was like screaming into a void. The next morning, she took the bus to the address in Kensington he'd claimed was his flat. She'd never been there. He'd always insisted on coming to her place, said his plumbing was being repaired. The address led to a bomb-damaged townhouse that had been vacant for years, according to the faded condemnation sign on the door. No residences, no Julian, standing on that foggy street, watching her reflection in the dark puddle. She felt something crack open inside her chest. How many lies had she swallowed? How many times had she made excuses for secrecy that should have been a warning? She found a public library 3 blocks away because she needed somewhere warm to sit, somewhere to stop shaking. She ordered nothing, just took a table by the window and pulled out the social register and a stack of newspapers. Her hands trembled as she opened the index. She'd never looked him up. In 3 months of courting, she'd never once checked the records. He'd said he valued privacy, and she'd respected that like an idiot, like a naive, trusting child. She looked up. Thorne. The results were immediate. Julian Thorne, 27, sole heir to the Thorne shipping and steel fortune, estimated in the millions. Photographs of him in tails at charity balls, his arm around women in gowns that cost more than Ilara's annual salary. Articles about his Oxford degree, his position on the board of directors, speculation about when he'd take over from his father, a profile in the Times that described him as notoriously private, an engagement rumor from 6 months ago linking him to the daughter of a Swedish diplomat, though both families had declined to comment. Ilara scrolled through the microfiche images, her vision blurring. There was Julian at the Royal Ascot, Julian on a yacht, Julian shaking hands with the Prime Minister, Julian looking perfectly comfortable in a world she couldn't even imagine inhabiting. She'd been a secret because she was never meant to be real. She was the basement studio, the closed door, the thing you visited after hours and never acknowledged in daylight. She was what a billionaire heir did when he was between lives. When he wanted to feel authentic and grounded by playing pretend with a poor girl who worked with her hands. Beloved listener, have you ever trusted someone completely only to discover they'd been lying about who they really were? How did you recover from that betrayal? Share your story in the comments. The library washroom was single occupancy, which was good because Ilara vomited twice and then sat on the cold tile floor trying to breathe. 19 and pregnant and so comprehensively stupid she wanted to claw the feeling out of her own chest. When she finally made it home, exhausted and hollow, she almost missed it. The black Rolls-Royce parked across the street, engine idling, curtains drawn. The same car that had been outside the shop for weeks before Julian disappeared. She stood on the pavement, staring at it, and it stared back like a dark eye, watching, waiting. Ilara climbed the 4 flights to her room, locked the bolt, and slid down against the door until she was sitting on the floor. She pressed both hands against her still flat stomach and tried to imagine what happened next. A millionaire family, a man who'd lied about everything, a pregnancy she couldn't afford. The black car outside like a promise or a threat. She'd thought she understood abandonment when Julian stopped calling. But looking at those photos of his real life, the life she'd never been meant to touch, Ilara realized she hadn't understood anything at all. He hadn't just left her. He'd gone back to where he actually belonged. And she had been so far beneath his world that he'd had to invent an entire false identity just to touch her without contamination. The worst part was that she'd let him. She'd been so grateful for his attention, so hungry to be seen, that she'd ignored every warning sign and called it love. Dottie had tried to tell her, the handkerchief had tried to tell her own instincts had tried to tell her, but Ilara had been 19 and lonely and desperate to believe that someone like him could want someone like her, so she'd believed it right up until the moment it became impossible to believe anymore. Outside, the black car's engine purred. Inside, Ilara Vance closed her eyes and began the work of understanding that she was completely, utterly alone. Sunday luncheons at the Vance house in Surrey had been mandatory since Ilara was old enough to sit in a chair. She sat in the same chair she'd occupied her entire life, the one facing the window that looked out onto the immaculate garden her father maintained with military precision. The house was suffocating in its perfectness. Wainscoting, freshly painted, parquet floors that gleamed, photographs documenting the Vance family legacy arranged chronologically in the hall. Arthur in his officer's uniform, Beatrice at her debutante ball, young and radiant in white, their wedding photo, her mother's disappointment not yet visible, and then Ilara at every stage, infant, toddler, gap-toothed child, awkward teenager, the only child, the only grandchild, the sole repository of all their hopes. Arthur carved the roast with surgical precision, his posture parade ground straight even at his own dinner table. Retirement hadn't softened him. If anything, it had concentrated his rigidity. Without soldiers to command, he turned that need for control inward onto his household, his wife, his daughter. Beatrice watched him serve with the tight smile she'd perfected over 30 years of marriage. She'd been a Sterling before she was a Vance, and she never let anyone forget it. Old county family traced back to the Restoration. She'd been expected to marry a lord, or at minimum a merchant heir. Instead, she'd fallen for a handsome captain from a nobody family and had spent 3 decades trying to reclaim the status she'd sacrificed. Her entire strategy had hinged on Ilara, the granddaughter of a Sterling, brilliant and beautiful, and destined for the kind of marriage his soldier should have made. Except Ilara had chosen antique restoration, had moved to an East End neighborhood Beatrice refused to visit, had stubbornly, selfishly insisted on wasting her potential on manual labor and poverty wages. "You look thin," Beatrice said, passing the peas. "Are you eating properly in that room?" "I'm fine, Mother." "You don't look fine. You look exhausted." Her father examined her with the same assessing gaze he'd once used on new recruits. "You're working too hard for too little. This restoration business—" "I'm pregnant." The words came out flat and simple, cutting through the familiar script of their disappointment. Ilara hadn't planned to say it like that, had rehearsed gentler approaches. But sitting in that suffocating house with its suffocating expectations, she couldn't manage subtlety. The silence was absolute. Arthur's hand froze mid-cut, the carving knife still pressed against meat. Beatrice's face went completely white, then red, then white again. The silver serving spoon slipped from her fingers and clattered against the china. "What did you say?" Her father's voice was very quiet, very controlled. That was worse than shouting. That meant rage being held in check by sheer force of will. "I'm pregnant. About 8 weeks." Beatrice made a sound like an injured animal, her hand flying to her chest. No, you're not. You're confused. This isn't—" Her breathing went ragged and fast. "Arthur, I can't breathe." "Beatrice, sit down." He didn't look at his wife. His eyes stayed locked on Ilara, gray and cold as a winter channel. "Who is the father?" "That's not—" Ilara started. "Who is the father?" The roar shook the crystal. Ilara flinched but held her ground. "It doesn't matter. He's not in the picture." "Not in the picture." His voice climbed toward hysteria. "What does that mean? Is he married? Oh God, please tell me he's not married. Tell me you didn't—" "He's not married. He's just gone." Arthur set down the carving knife with deliberate precision, each movement controlled. "You're telling me that my only daughter, my only child, the only heir to the Vance name is pregnant by a man who abandoned her." The shame in his voice was worse than anger. Ilara felt it like acid in her throat. "I thought—" Her voice cracked. "I thought he loved me." "You thought?" Her father laughed, a bitter sound with no humor in it. "You're 19 years old. What do you know about love? What do you know about anything?" Beatrice was crying now, tears tracking down her powdered face. "The club, oh God, the garden club. Lady Ashworth already looks at me like I'm— And now this." She grabbed Ilara's wrist hard enough to hurt. "Who knows? Who have you told?" "No one, just you." Good. We can fix this." Beatrice's eyes were wild, desperate. "There are doctors, discreet doctors in Switzerland. We have 72 hours. The earlier the better, they say." "I'm not terminating the pregnancy." "Yes, you are." Arthur's fist came down on the table like a gavel. The wine glass next to his plate shattered, sending glass and claret across the white tablecloth like a wound. "You are our only child. Do you understand what that means? Our entire legacy rests on you. Everything we've built, everything we've sacrificed. I didn't ask for that. You don't have to ask. It's who you are." He was standing now, towering over the table. "Your mother gave up her position, her family's expectations, everything. And for what? So our daughter could throw away her future on some man who won't even claim his own child." "Arthur—" Beatrice reached for him, but he shook her off. "We have poured everything into you, every opportunity, every advantage. We have one child, one chance to ensure this family means something. And you?" His voice broke. Ilara had never heard her father's voice break. You were supposed to be our redemption. You were supposed to marry well to restore what your mother sacrificed, to give the Vance name the dignity it deserves. Instead, you've become our greatest shame." The words hit like physical blows. Ilara felt tears burning her eyes, but refused to let them fall. "I'm keeping the baby." "Then you're not keeping us." Beatrice's voice had gone flat. All the hysteria drained away into something harder. 72 hours, Ilara. You resolve this situation or you are no longer our daughter." "Mom, don't!" Her mother stood, smoothing her skirt with shaking hands. "Don't call me that. Not until you've fixed what you've broken." Arthur turned away, his shoulders rigid. "An only child carries the weight of an entire family's future. We made you our whole world, and this is how you repay us." Ilara looked at the shattered wine glass, the ruined tablecloth, the roast going cold on perfect plates. She looked at her parents, her only family, her only safety net, and saw the door closing. Not metaphorically, actually closing. Her father was walking out of the dining room. Her mother was following. "I'm sorry," Ilara whispered. But they were already gone. She sat alone at the table in the house where she'd grown up, surrounded by the evidence of being treasured and possessed, and utterly, completely alone. An only child disappoints absolutely. There are no siblings to compensate, no other chances, no diffusion of expectations. She was their everything, and now she was nothing at all. The 72 hours crawled past like a slow execution. Ilara spent them in her room, which she'd already received an eviction notice for. 30 days to vacate, the landlord had said, though that was before he'd learned she'd lost her job at the antique shop. The owner had let her go a few days after Julian disappeared. "Restructuring," he'd said, though she suspected otherwise. With no contract, she had no protections, no recourse, just a polite letter thanking her for her service and a final envelope of cash that barely covered what she was already behind on rent. So, when her parents' deadline arrived, Ilara was already drowning. She just hadn't hit the bottom yet. Her father called at precisely 6 a.m. on the third day. No greeting, just, "You have until noon to collect anything you left here. After that, we're disposing of it." "Dad, please." The line went dead. Ilara took the train to Surrey with £10 and 7 shillings in her purse and morning sickness roiling in her stomach. She threw up twice on the platform, hunched over a bin while commuters stepped carefully around her like she was something contagious. Maybe she was. Maybe ruin was catching. The rain started as she walked the 6 blocks from the station to her parents' house. Not a gentle spring rain, but a cold, punishing English downpour that soaked through her coat in minutes. She arrived shivering to find her entire childhood arranged on the front lawn. Boxes and trunks already dark with water. Her clothes, her books, the precision tools she'd saved for months to buy. Her portfolio in a box that was definitely not waterproof. Framed photos of a life that apparently no longer existed. Everything she'd left in her childhood bedroom now drowning in the rain on carefully maintained grass. Neighbors had come out to watch. She could see curtains twitching in windows up and down the lane. Her humiliation had an audience. Beatrice stood in the doorway, perfectly dry under the portico. She wore a twin set and pearls, dressed for bridge, or maybe for the role of dignified matriarch forced to make impossible choices. She wasn't crying. She looked at Ilara with something far worse than anger. Hatred. Cold, clean hatred for the daughter who had ruined everything. "Mom," Ilara said, her voice breaking. "Please, I don't have anywhere to go." "You had somewhere. You had everything." Beatrice's voice was steady, almost pleasant. "This house, our support, a future. You chose to throw it away. I didn't choose to be abandoned. You chose him. Whoever he was, you chose to be reckless and stupid. You chose to keep a pregnancy that will destroy any chance you had at a decent life. Beatrice smoothed her already perfect hair. You could have been anything, Ilara. Anything. You were brilliant, beautiful enough, from a good family. You could have married well, lived well, made something of the Vance name. Her mouth twisted. You chose to be nothing instead. I'm your daughter. No. Beatrice's eyes were dry and hard as stones. My daughter died when she decided an illegitimate bastard was more important than her family. You're just someone who looks like her. Ilara saw her father then, standing at the second-floor window of his study, arms crossed, face expressionless, watching his only child stand in the rain, begging. He didn't come down. Didn't even have the courage or cruelty to deliver this exile himself. He just watched from behind glass, while his wife did the ugly work. Your father wanted me to tell you, Beatrice continued, that you are not to use the Vance name anymore. You are not to contact us. You are not to tell anyone you are our daughter. As of today, we are childless. She said it like she was discussing the weather. We'll tell people you died. A car accident, perhaps? Something tragic but clean? You're erasing me. You erased yourself. Beatrice started to close the door, then paused. If you'd had siblings, perhaps one of you could have been the disappointment. But you were all we had, our only investment, and you've proven to be worthless. The door shut with a soft, final click. The deadbolt turned. Ilara stood, staring at the house where she'd lived for 19 years, and it stared back like a stranger's face. The rain came harder. Ilara's parents chose their reputation over their only child. If you were in her position at 19, what would you have done? Would you have terminated the pregnancy to get your family back, or made the same choice she did? Be honest. She managed to drag the most essential boxes to the curb before her arms gave out. Clothes, her portfolio probably already destroyed, some tools. The rest would have to stay, would dissolve in the rain or be stolen or thrown away. She hailed a cab with money she didn't have and gave Dottie's address because there was nowhere else. Dottie answered the door in her dressing gown, took one look at Ilara's face, and pulled her inside. Oh, darling, oh no! The flat was small. A studio in Hackney that Dottie shared with her boyfriend, Frank. It smelled like tea and cigarettes, and the particular mustiness of a place that never quite got enough air. Frank was on the sofa, newspaper in hand, listening to the wireless. He glanced over, took in Ilara's soaked clothes and cardboard boxes, and his expression closed. Dottie, she needs help, Frank. We talked about this, about keeping boundaries. We can't afford— I'm not asking you to afford anything, Dottie snapped. She just needs the sofa for a few days. Frank lowered his paper. A few days? That's it. I'm not trying to be a hard man, but I'm not getting involved in— He gestured vaguely at Ilara. Whatever drama this is. Pregnant girl, family trouble. I don't need that energy here. Ilara wanted to argue, but she was too tired, too cold, too utterly defeated. 3 days, she whispered. I'll find somewhere. She had no idea where. For the next 48 hours, Ilara lived in a holding pattern of despair. She slept on Dottie's sofa, threw up in Dottie's basin, and made lists of options that all dead-ended into impossibility. Hostels had waiting lists. Church charities were full. Her £10 wouldn't cover first week's rent anywhere decent in London. She had no job, no references who weren't connected to the antique shop, no family, no siblings to call, no brother's spare room, no sister who might understand. Just the vast, howling absence of being an only child with no safety net. On the third day, Frank's patience ran out. I'm sorry, but you need to go today. Dottie fought him, voices rising behind the kitchen door, but Alara was already packing. She understood. She was a black hole of need, and no one wanted to be pulled into that gravity. She left at 2 p.m. with everything she owned in 3 boxes and 1 suitcase. The rain had returned. Or maybe it had never really stopped. Alara made it 2 blocks before exhaustion and despair drove her to a bus stop bench. She sat down heavily, surrounded by her pathetic belongings, and finally let herself cry. 19 years old, pregnant, disowned, evicted, friendless, a few pounds to her name, and nowhere on earth to go. An only child carries the weight of an entire family's expectations. And when she fails, there's no one to catch her. No sibling to diffuse the blame. No brother or sister still in their parents' good graces who might advocate, might provide a bridge back. Just complete, total erasure. The black Rolls-Royce pulled up so quietly, Alara didn't notice it until the back door opened. She looked up, rain dripping into her eyes, and saw a woman stepping out onto the pavement. 50s, silver hair in a perfect chignon, wearing a charcoal wool suit that probably cost more than Alara's entire life's earnings. Diamond earrings, heels that didn't belong on wet pavement but navigated it anyway. Everything about her screamed wealth and control, and the kind of power that bent the world to its will. She held a black umbrella, though she didn't extend it towards Alara. Just stood there, dry and immaculate, studying the shivering girl on the bench with the clinical interest of an entomologist examining a particularly fascinating insect. "Miss Vance?" Her voice was cultured, smooth as expensive sherry. "My name is Lady Constance Thorne. I believe we need to talk." The name hit like a fist to the stomach. Thorne. Julian's mother. The woman smiled, and it was the coldest expression Alara had ever seen. No warmth reached her eyes the same shade of hazel as her son's. "I've been looking forward to meeting you," Lady Constance continued, "though I feel I know you quite well already." The black car, the one outside the shop, outside her room. Not her imagination, not paranoia. Lady Constance Thorne had been circling like a shark since the beginning, waiting for exactly this moment, waiting for Alara to have absolutely nothing left. "Shall we?" Lady Constance gestured to the car's open door. "I promise you'll want to hear what I have to say. After all," her smile widened, sharp as a blade, "you have nowhere else to be." The hotel was the kind of place Alara had only seen in cinema newsreels, the Savoy overlooking the Thames, where doormen wore livery and the lobby smelled like money and hothouse lilies. Lady Constance swept through it like she owned the building. Maybe she did. And Alara followed, soaked and shivering, leaving a trail of rainwater on marble floors. No one stopped them. No one questioned why a society matron was bringing a drowned rat of a girl through their pristine establishment. Lady Constance's presence was armor enough. The suite was on the top floor. Alara had a single dizzy moment stepping inside, taking in the velvet drapes, the grand piano, the furniture that looked like it belonged in a palace. The sitting room alone was larger than her entire former flat. "Sit," Lady Constance said, not unkindly. She gestured to a cream-colored sofa. "You're freezing. I'll have them bring tea." Alara sat because her legs couldn't hold her anymore. Lady Constance made a brief phone call, then settled into the wing-back chair across from her, crossing her ankles with practiced elegance. She studied Alara the way an art appraiser might study a painting, cataloging flaws, assessing value. "You're younger than I expected," Lady Constance said finally. "The photographs didn't quite capture it. 19. My God, you're practically a child." "I'm not a child." "No." A thin smile. What would you call someone who falls in love with a stranger after 3 months and gets pregnant without considering the consequences? The words stung because they were true. Ilara looked down at her hands, still trembling from cold or shock or both. A knock at the door. A waiter wheeled in a cart laden with silver tea service, finger sandwiches, pastries. Lady Constance signed something without looking at it, and the waiter vanished. She poured tea into bone china cups, so delicate Ilara was afraid to touch hers. "Drink," Lady Constance instructed. "You look half dead." The tea was perfect, hot and sweet, and everything Ilara's body needed. She drank it too fast and burned her tongue. Better. Lady Constance hadn't touched her own cup. Good. Now we can talk like civilized people. She set a leather portfolio on the table between them. "I'm going to be direct, Miss Vance, because I suspect you're tired of being lied to. My son is an idiot. A brilliant idiot with excellent business instincts, but an idiot nonetheless when it comes to impulse control." Ilara said nothing. "He told me about you eventually, after I'd already had you investigated. Of course, I knew about the relationship before he worked up the courage to confess." Lady Constance's expression didn't change. "When you became pregnant, he panicked like a schoolboy. He wanted to handle it himself, wanted to spare you from all this. Instead, he made it infinitely worse by running away. Where is he?" The question came out smaller than Ilara intended. "Switzerland, where I sent him to think about his responsibilities." Lady Constance opened the portfolio, revealing documents. "Julian has obligations, Miss Vance, to his family, to our company, to a future that was decided long before he met you. He's engaged to be married, has been for 6 months, though the formal announcement hasn't been made yet. Serafina Lindström, daughter of the Swedish ambassador. It's an excellent match." The words landed like stones in still water, sending ripples of pain through Ilara's chest. "You didn't know?" Lady Constance tilted her head. "No, of course you didn't. He wouldn't tell you that. He wanted to play at being normal, at being free, and you were his escape fantasy. The pretty poor girl with talented hands and no expectations." "Stop." "Why? These are facts. Unpleasant facts, but facts nonetheless." Lady Constance slid a document across the table. "Which brings us to why we're here. You're 19 years old, pregnant, disowned by your family, and homeless. I know about your parents. I know about your eviction. I know you have £10 in your purse and nowhere to go." The surveillance had been complete. Total. Ilara felt stripped naked. "I'm not a monster," Lady Constance continued. "I'm a mother protecting her son from a complication that could derail his entire future. And I'm a businesswoman offering you a solution." She tapped the document. £5,000, enough to start over anywhere in the Commonwealth. Australia, perhaps, or Canada. Have your baby, build a life. All I ask is that you disappear and never contact my family again." Ilara stared at the papers. £5,000, an incomprehensible amount of money. "There's a contract, of course. You never reveal Julian's identity as the father. You forfeit any claim to parental support or acknowledgement. If you violate these terms, you'll owe us $50,000 in damages." Lady Constance's voice was pleasant, conversational. "But you won't violate them because you're not stupid. You're desperate." She produced a fountain pen from somewhere. Set it on top of the contract. "Sign, Miss Vance. Take the money. Save yourself." Ilara's hand moved toward the pen without her conscious permission. £5,000. She could leave London. Start fresh somewhere cheaper. Have her baby in safety. Stop drowning. Her fingers closed around the pen. It was heavy. Gold. Expensive. Her hand shook so badly she could barely hold it. Lady Constance placed a photograph on the table. "For motivation. Awesome." Ilara looked without meaning to. A photo of Julian in a dinner jacket, his arm around a blonde woman in a champagne-colored gown. Both of them smiling at the camera, comfortable and matched and perfect together. Ilara stared at the image. Julian looked happy, happier than he'd ever looked in her cramped room, in her basement workshop. He looked like he belonged in that world of tuxedos and champagne and blonde women who'd never worked with their hands. He'd moved on. Was moving on. Had probably been engaged the entire time he was sleeping in her bed and whispering that he loved her. She set the pen down. No. Lady Constance's eyebrows rose fractionally. I'm sorry? I don't want your money. Ilara's voice was stronger now. I want him to know he has a child. What he does with that information is his choice. But I won't disappear like I never existed. I won't sign away my baby's right to know who their father is. You're making a terrible mistake. Maybe, but it's my mistake to make. You're 19 years old. Lady Constance's composure cracked, irritation bleeding through. You have no idea what you're refusing. That money would change your life. Without it, you'll struggle. You'll suffer. Your child will suffer. Then we'll suffer. Ilara stood up, her legs unsteady but holding. But at least I'll be able to look my kid in the eye someday and say, I didn't sell you out for money. Lady Constance stood as well, and suddenly she wasn't kind anymore. The mask had fallen away, revealing something cold and sharp underneath. You'll regret this, she said quietly. I promise you, you'll regret this. Maybe. Ilara moved toward the door. But I already regret trusting your son. I won't regret keeping my spine. She walked out. Behind her, she heard Lady Constance asking the operator for a number. Her voice carried through the door Ilara hadn't quite closed. The girl refused. She's young and stubborn. Yes, I'm certain. No, negotiation won't work. She's got pride. Activate the alternative plan. If she won't take money to disappear, we'll simply make her disappear. Ilara's blood turned to ice, but she kept walking toward the lift, kept moving. She'd just made an enemy of a billionaire dynasty, and she had absolutely nothing left to lose. 5,000 pounds. Ilara was homeless, pregnant, and desperate. Would you have taken Lady Constance's money, or would pride and principle matter more than survival? Drop your thoughts below. The room was in a boarding house in Bermondsey, on a street where half the gas lamps were broken, and the corner shop had bars on the windows. A tiny space that smelled like boiled cabbage and the previous tenant's pipe smoke. The roof leaked. The pipes groaned all night. The lock on the door was flimsy enough that Ilara wedged a chair under the knob before sleeping. But it was hers. She'd scraped together the first week's rent from pawning a silver locket, the only thing of value she had left. The landlady, a woman named Mrs. Gable, who barely looked at her, had handed over keys without asking questions. The scullery job came 3 days later. Miller's, a bustling chop house near the docks that served burnt coffee and gristle pies to dock workers. The manager hired her on the spot, desperate for someone willing to work the graveyard shift, scrubbing pots from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., shillings a night plus leftovers. Ilara was 19 years old, 3 months pregnant, and so tired she sometimes hallucinated shapes in the steam rising from the dishwater. But she was surviving. Barely. The antique world had closed its doors to her. A position she'd applied for at a gallery in Mayfair, decent pay, daytime hours, was rescinded because of outside references. The manager had called apologetically to say they decided to hire someone else. But when Ilara walked past the shop 2 weeks later, the Help Wanted sign was still in the window. Sabotage, systematic and untraceable. Every time Ilara tried to gain footing, the ground shifted beneath her. She felt like a child playing dress-up in adult responsibilities, failing at every turn. The scullery shifts blurred together. Scrubbing grease, hauling buckets of water, dodging the wandering hands of the line cook who made comments about her body that made her skin crawl, cleaning floors, scraping plates, standing for 8 hours straight while her back screamed and her feet swelled, going home at dawn to sleep fitfully for 4 hours before waking to nausea and fear, and the slow understanding that this was her life now. At 5 months pregnant, her body started betraying her more aggressively. The morning sickness that was supposed to fade hadn't. She threw up in the alley behind the kitchen, rinsed her mouth, went back to work. Her shoes stopped fitting, her dress strained across her growing belly. The exhaustion was the worst part. Not normal tiredness, but a bone-deep depletion that made thinking difficult, made everything feel like moving through treacle. She would stand at the sink and forget why she was there, forget her own name for a dizzy, terrifying second. It happened on a Tuesday morning just before the end of her shift. Ilara was carrying a stack of heavy iron pans when the world tilted sideways. The stone floor rushed up to meet her. She heard the crash of iron, felt wetness spreading across her apron, and then nothing. She woke up in a ward, a nurse shining a light in her eyes. "Stay with me, dear. What's your name?" "Ilara." Her tongue felt thick. "The baby. We're checking the baby. How far along are you?" 5 months. The nurse's face tightened. "Okay, you're going to be okay." But her voice said she wasn't sure. The hospital was St. Jude's, enormous and grim and overwhelming. They wheeled her through corridors that all smelled of antiseptic and misery, past rows of beds filled with the sick, into a curtained area where a doctor pressed a cold stethoscope against her belly. The fetal heartbeat filled the small space, fast and strong and real. "Baby's fine," the doctor said, "but you're severely malnourished and anemic. When was the last time you had a proper meal?" Ilara couldn't remember. "I eat," she muttered. The doctor made notes without looking at her. "I'm keeping you overnight for observation. You need rest and proper food or you're risking premature labor." "I can't afford overnight. This is a charity ward. We don't turn away the needy." Ilara lay staring at the water-stained ceiling and tried not to calculate what this would cost in lost wages. Tried not to think about how she'd miss her shift tonight and probably get fired. Tried not to cry. The matron came in around midnight, older than the others, sturdy, with kind eyes and hair pinned back under a crisp cap. Her badge read, Matron Higgins. "How you feeling, love?" She checked the chart, adjusted the blanket. "Dizzy still. I'm okay." "You're not okay. You're exhausted and scared and trying to hold it together." Matron Higgins pulled up a chair, sat down like she had all the time in the world. "How old are you?" 19. The matron's eyes filled with sympathy. Just like that. Instant, genuine concern for a stranger. "Lord, you're just a baby yourself." The kindness broke something in Ilara. She started crying, the ugly kind of crying she'd been holding back for months. Matron Higgins held her hand, didn't tell her to calm down or to maintain a stiff upper lip, just held on while Ilara shattered. "I don't know what I'm doing," Ilara gasped. "I don't know how to do any of this." "Nobody does at first, but you're not alone." Matron Higgins squeezed her hand. "I've been where you are. Pregnant during the war, husband gone, working 3 jobs. My son just entered university last year." "How did you survive?" "One day at a time, and with help. People who'd been through it reached out their hands, and I grabbed on." Matron Higgins reached into her apron pocket, pulled out a card. "This is a guild. Women helping women. War widows and single mothers, mostly. We share resources, job leads. One of them has a room available in a better boarding house than wherever you're living now. Another works at the rationing board. We take care of each other." Ilara stared at the card. "An address in Lambeth. A time, Thursdays, 7:12 p.m. Why would you help me? You don't even know me. Because someone helped me once when I had nothing. And because you're 19 years old and you shouldn't have to do this alone. Matron Higgins stood, smoothed her apron. Come Thursday, you'll see. Alara's own family abandoned her, but a stranger named Matron Higgins became the mother she needed. Have you ever had someone outside your family save you when your own people wouldn't? Tell us about your Matron Higgins. The gathering was in a church basement. Wooden chairs arranged in a circle, a table with tea and donated baby clothes. 12 women ranging from late teens to 40s, every background, some with babies on their laps, others visibly pregnant like Alara. They welcomed her without questions, shared their stories. War losses, abandonment, poverty, all the ways women end up alone with children to raise. They offered practical help. A pram one woman's son had outgrown, extra ration coupons. Someone had a lead on a clerical job at a textile factory that didn't require standing all day. For the first time in months, Alara felt like she could breathe. She moved into the room Matron Higgins had mentioned, a shared house in Clapham with 3 other mothers. Her space was tiny, but it was clean and safe. The sabotage continued. A promised interview canceled last minute. Her application for assistance mysteriously lost. But now she had a network. Women who knew how to navigate the system, who could spot the difference between bad luck and active interference. Someone's blocking you, Matron Higgins said after the 3rd canceled interview. Someone with money and connections. Alara told her about Lady Constance, about Julian, about being 19 and stupid enough to believe a man who'd lied about everything. Matron Higgins didn't judge. Rich people think they can make poor people disappear. Sometimes they're right, but not always. Strange things started happening around month 6. Small envelopes of cash appeared under her door. £5 here, 10 there. Never enough to be obvious, but enough to cover the rent. A week of groceries. She assumed it was Dottie, her guilt manifesting as anonymous help. It's not me, darling, Dottie said when Alara finally thanked her. I wish I could, but Frank and I are saving for a wedding. Then who? Dottie shrugged. Maybe you've got a guardian angel. But Alara didn't believe in angels anymore. She believed in survival, in the women who shared their food and watched each other's children, in Matron Higgins, who became the mother figure Beatrice had never been. She was 19 years old, 6 months pregnant, and still drowning. But at least now she wasn't drowning alone. The contractions started during her shift at the new job, inventory work at a textile warehouse in Battersea. Light duty, they'd promised, mostly sitting, tallying bolts of cloth. Alara was 29 weeks pregnant, her belly enormous on her thin frame, moving slowly and carefully. The first pain hit at 2 us in the afternoon, a tightening across her abdomen that stole her breath. She stopped, hands braced on the desk, and waited for it to pass. False labor, probably. The book said those were normal. The second one came 10 minutes later, then 8, then 5. Soon she was in the washroom timing pains with her watch, trying not to panic. 7 months. The baby wasn't due for 2 more months. This wasn't supposed to happen yet. She called Matron Higgins at the hospital. I'm coming, Higgins said, her voice calm and absolute. Don't move, I'm 20 minutes away. She made it in 15, a borrowed car screeching to the curb. Alara was doubled over by the entrance, breathing through another contraction that felt like her body was trying to tear itself in half. Easy, love, you'll be fine, Higgins said, already guiding her toward the car. The drive to the hospital was a blur of pain and fog. Alara gripped the door handle, her other hand pressed against her belly, where Clara, she'd chosen the name weeks ago, whispered it to her daughter in the dark, was trying to come too soon, too small, too early. She's not ready, Alara gasped. It's too early. She needs more time. Babies come when they're ready, not when we want them to. Higgins ran a red light, her jaw set. She's a fighter, I can tell already. The emergency ward took her immediately. They tried to stop the labor, but Clara had made her decision. At 7 months, she was coming into the world whether anyone was ready or not. The labor lasted 19 hours. 19 hours of pain that rewrote Ilara's understanding of what a body could endure. The contractions kept coming, relentless, tearing through her. Ilara was 19 years old, and she had never felt more like a child. She wanted her mother. God help her. She wanted Beatrice. Wanted someone to hold her hand and tell her she was doing well, that this was normal, that she wasn't dying. But there was only Matron Higgins gripping her hand hard enough to bruise, wiping sweat from her forehead, saying, "Breathe, love. Just breathe. You've got this." She didn't have it. She was failing, drowning, breaking apart. At hour 17, something went wrong. The nurses' faces went professionally blank in a way that meant terror. Someone said hemorrhage, and someone else shouted orders. Ilara couldn't process through the agony. "We need to operate now," a doctor said, leaning over her. "We're doing a section. Do you understand?" Ilara tried to answer, but the world was going gray at the edges, sounds becoming distant and muffled. The last thing she remembered was Higgins's face, tears streaming down her cheeks, saying, "Fight! You fight for her!" Then nothing. She woke up in pieces. First awareness of pain, a different pain than labor, deeper and sharper. Then voices, distant and echoing. Then light, too bright. "Ilara." Matron Higgins's voice, thick with relief. "Can you hear me, love?" She managed a sound that might have been yes. "The baby's okay. She's in the incubator, but she's breathing. She's alive." Ilara forced her eyes open. The wardroom swam into focus. White walls, iron bed frames. Matron Higgins sitting beside her, looking exhausted and older than she had that morning. "What happened?" "You lost a lot of blood. They had to operate. It was close. Too close." Higgins's voice cracked. "The baby." Ilara tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. Pain screamed through her abdomen. "Don't move. She's okay. I promise. 2 pounds, 14 ounces. Tiny but fierce." Higgins smiled through tears. "You did it. You're a mother now." They brought Clara to her 6 hours later, when Ilara could sit up without fainting. A nurse wheeled in a glass-walled incubator. And there she was, impossibly small, a fragile bird of a thing with tubes and wires and skin so translucent Ilara could see the delicate network of veins beneath. Her eyes were closed, her chest rising and falling with rapid, determined breaths. "You can touch her," the nurse said gently. "Through the ports. She needs to feel you." Ilara slid her hands through the openings, her fingers trembling as they made contact with Clara's impossibly small body. Her daughter was the length of her forearm. Perfect and terrifying and alive. "Hi," Ilara whispered. "Hi, Clara. I'm your mum." Clara's tiny hand curled, fingers no bigger than matchsticks grasping at nothing. Ilara eased her pinky finger into that grip, and Clara held on. That's when she started crying. Not the painful, desperate tears from before, but something deeper. Grief and love and a bone-deep understanding of what she'd just committed herself to. This child, this impossible, fragile, perfect child who'd come too soon into a world that wasn't ready for her. "You're going to be okay," Ilara said, her voice breaking. "I promise I'm going to make everything okay." The flowers arrived the next morning. White roses, 5 dozen of them, arranged in an obscenely expensive crystal vase. The porter could barely carry it into the ward. There was no card, Matron Higgins was the one who noticed the detail. The florist's label was from a shop in Paris. International delivery. Someone with money sent these, Higgins said carefully. Ilara knew. Of course she knew. Julian. Somehow he knew she'd given birth, knew about Clara. Maybe he had someone watching her. Or maybe Lady Constance had informed him as a courtesy. Either way, he knew. And he'd sent flowers instead of showing up. The rage that washed through her was purifying, clarifying. He knew he had a daughter born 2 months premature, fighting for every breath in an incubator. And his response was roses. Beautiful, expensive, meaningless roses. "Get rid of them," Ilara said. "Give them to the other patients. Throw them away. I don't care." Higgins squeezed her shoulder. "You got it, love." That night, alone in the ward, with the surgical pain still sharp and raw, Ilara made her way to the nursery. She wasn't supposed to be walking yet, but she needed to see her daughter, needed to make a promise. The nursery was dim and quiet, except for the rhythmic hissing of the oxygen machines. Clara was sleeping, her tiny chest rising and falling. A nurse smiled at Ilara, but didn't stop her from settling into the chair beside the incubator. Ilara pressed her hand against the glass. "Listen to me," she whispered. "I know I'm young. I know I'm nobody right now. But I swear to you, Clara, I will build you a kingdom. You will never bow to anyone. You will never feel small or worthless or disposable." Her voice got stronger, more certain. "I will work until my hands bleed. I will learn everything I need to learn. I will become someone who matters. Someone who can protect you from every single person who thinks they can make us disappear." She thought of Lady Constance, of Julian, of her parents watching from their perfect house while she drowned. "And when I'm done, everyone who abandoned us will know exactly what they lost." Clara stirred slightly, her tiny fingers flexing. "You're going to have everything I didn't. Safety, security, a mother who chooses you every single day." Ilara's tears fell onto the glass. "I'm 19 years old, and I have no idea what I'm doing, but I know how to love you. I know how to fight, and I will never, ever stop." She sat there for an hour, making promises to a 2-pound infant who couldn't understand words yet, but who had already changed everything. What Ilara didn't see was the man in the corridor. Mid-40s, expensive trench coat, holding a camera with a long lens. He snapped several clear shots through the nursery window, of Clara in her glass box, of Ilara's young face bent over her daughter with fierce devotion. He wasn't one of Lady Constance's people. His employer had paid extremely well for photographic proof that Julian Thorne had fathered a child with a teenage girl. Proof that could be used later, when the timing was right, when maximum damage could be inflicted. He got what he needed and disappeared toward the exit, the film roll tucked safely in his pocket. Ilara, oblivious, kept her vigil, kept making promises, kept transforming from a frightened girl into something harder, sharper, more dangerous. A mother with nothing left to lose is the most powerful force in the world. And Ilara Vance had just been born. Thank you so much for being here with me, my amazing, timeless family. If you want part 2 of the story, and I really hope you do, please like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to this family. Then comment part 2, so I know you're coming back. I can't wait to show you what happens next. Do take care of yourself. I'll see you in part 2. Lots of love.